All right, guys, welcome to the workshop. We're going to be talking on today's Lunch and Learn about mobility strategies. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen quickly. We'll go for about 10 or 15 minutes and then answer questions at the end if you guys have anything. And let's see, if I click there, I'm going to share the screen. This way we make sure you guys can see that. So I'm going to actually move this thing down to this screen so I can see it better and I'm not looking up the whole time for you guys. All right, so there we go. We'll present. So today we're going to talk through some mobility strategies, and mobility is a pretty hot topic these days. It's something that last year when I spoke on the Perform Better tour, that was one of the things that they said was in the reviews, all the trainers wanted mobility exercises and strategies. And, hey, there's Greg. Hey, Greg.
Hey.
It was kind of interesting because, usually in our facility, a lot of times people are more interested in the work. They want to get their endurance training or their strength training. But from a trainer standpoint, it seems like everybody's really more on the mobility side. And maybe that's just because we are doing so much work. We need to kind of counter that with some good movement training. So, we'll start into this, why mobility first and why we would want to make it be an important thing. Sometimes there's some schools of thought that talks, hey, well, if we just train it, it doesn't matter what the movement patterns are. If we just groove those patterns, it's going to come about. And I think the thing we got to take a step back with is understanding the fact that quality, stability, and movement is really driven by good proprioception. Proprioception meaning being able to kind of feel your body in space. And if I don't have good proprioception, I'm going to have limitations in movement. And if those limitations might be from a mobility restriction, so something like, not being able to move my ankle well or not being able to move my hip well, I'm not actually feeling the movement as well as I could if I have that limited range of motion. So think of it this way. If my left ankle is locked up and my right ankle moves really freely, I can actually feel more if I'm on my right side balancing versus when I'm standing on my left foot. So that left foot is almost like not hearing the environment. It's not connecting with the ground as well if I have a restriction in mobility. So freeing up the range and then adding in the mobility, the stability after, so more of like motor control drills would be the way that we would want to do this. That's why we typically start our workouts with movement. So we're going to do things like breathing, which we'll talk about in a minute. We'll do things like freeing up our ankles, freeing up our hips, freeing up our T-spine so that we can move really well. The problem sometimes people get into with mobility training is they just do a ton of mobility, a lot of stretching. They free up all this range of motion, but then they never really add in the motor control after it. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of how we progress from increasing range of motion into then this more of a motor control type situation. But first, I think it's important to understand what causes mobility problems. So, what are the things that are happening and why people are tight? Usually, you have those hypermobile people out there, but most of the time, if we're doing what we're doing right now, sitting in an office, not moving around on a regular basis. Even if you're exercising 4 hours a day, we're designed to be up on our feet, hunting, gathering, doing stuff. I don't care if you exercise a ton, you're still not getting as much movement as we probably should. So you're going to have these things that are causing mobility problems like fascial issues where you have maybe some trigger points or denser area of tissues. And we have our PT, Greg, is on the call right now. Greg's someone who works, does a lot of manual therapy and does that with people to help free up some range of motion in specific areas that need it. Muscle bulk, just like simply just being too muscular. I just did a course last week for the Navy and we had a good amount of people who had a lot of trouble with their shoulder mobility because they just had big traps. They're used to doing a bunch, they're lifters, they're used to getting after it in the gym. And they had a real issue with a lot of the shoulder movements because they just had too much muscle bulk. And then we deal with, as a lot of people know at the gym, we deal with a lot of high school athletes and younger athletes sometimes when they're going through growth spurts. That can be a mechanical reason for someone to have an issue with their growth, with their mobility. Things like, and this is more and more as you age and as you, kind of make your way through different types of training environments. This idea of some chemical issues of why mobility might be a problem, increased inflammation, whether that be from diet or the activities that you're doing on a regular basis that are that could be causing this. Inflammaging, which would be like inflammation due to aging, you're just going to have more of it. And then ischemia, which is mostly due to our current postures and positions that we're in on a regular basis that could be affecting the way that we move. So those are our chemical reasons. And then the neurological reasons, which these are the areas that are we typically work on with people in the gym. Things like working on their breathing to get their nervous system to go from this kind of fight or flight response to more of a rest digest. We talked about that last week in the lunch and learn about a morning routine, being able to kind of reset things and not have everybody kind of everything on with this tone, kind of changing over to that different parasympathetic nervous system, doing things so we're not guarding. Overload, just work overload, things that we're doing too much of. This can also cause neurological responses that are going to put you in positions and postures that are going to lock you up. And then stretch reflex, a lot of mobility drills and things people get sent home with say, hey, I have tight hamstrings, and a coach or a well-meaning trainer might send them home with a bunch of stretches. And I've done it from time to time. I've been doing this for 20 years. In the early days, it was like, hey, your hamstrings are tight, you got to be stretching every day. And no one ever came back looser. Everyone always came back and they were still tight. So what is that? Why are we, if the muscle is tight and I stretch it, logically thinking that should change it, but it doesn't change it. And that's because it's more of a neurological response in the body's way of like fighting back. If I'm kind of trying to force something into a position where it's doesn't want to go, it's going to fight back and maybe even make things tighter. So how can we shut down that kind of response that the body is giving us? A lot of times it's going to come through some of the breathing exercises, as well as just basic movement patterns through 3 areas, which we'll talk about in a minute. So how come I'm not clicking through? There we go. So here are our mobility strategies. From a mechanical standpoint, I don't want to discount stretching completely. It could be appropriate in certain situations. I'm finding that we're not using it as much as we used to. Myofascial release, whether it be with a good manual therapist or maybe some self-myofascial stuff with a lacrosse ball or tennis ball or, a roller stick or a foam roll, getting through some of those denser area of tissues. There could be some benefits. Most of the research is really showing it almost more from the chemical standpoint, because I'm getting an increased amount of blood flow to the body, and that's increasing my ability to move. So on the mechanical side, without having a good manual therapist that can really get their hands in there and do what you want them to do to the joint, most of the time it's something that's going to take a little bit longer than what we think, by just stretching and foam rolling. Not going to change things as fast as we want it to. And then from a chemical standpoint, just increasing our activity in cardio can help bring down some of the inflammation, get us moving well. Posture control is a term we use a lot now in the gym, and that's something that not a lot of people are doing, but doing some heavy loaded carries, working on being in good positions, tall kneeling positions with a heavy kettlebell, and we do a lot of our neck turns and torso turns. Loading the system in that good posture, that's going to put us in better posture when we're out in the world walking around. So we're going to kind of counter those effects of being in bad postures, which might increase ischemia, which is just, kind of like restriction in blood flow. If I've got better posture, I'm going to be able to have blood move around my system a lot easier, and I'm going to decrease inflammation and have more quality movement. Then nutrition. This is a big one. You think, oh, how is nutrition going to affect my mobility? Well, if I'm eating foods that are going to make me more inflamed, that is going to lead to lack of mobility. And then our last piece is that neurological piece. So doing things like our breathing exercises, just simply stated, if you think of breathing, it's not just the gas exchange of how we're getting oxygen in, it's also how our rib cage moves, how our diaphragm moves, which is a big muscle that kind of slices the body in half. It's your upper half of the body, lower half of the body. It's a very important muscle that it moves correctly. If my breathing is inconsistent and not of quality, that can definitely affect the way that I'm moving and my mobility. So, the rib cage, the diaphragm, the spine, the way that the shoulder blades interact, and then the shoulder, right? So, things like having people go through those breathing exercises sometimes moves, so you're familiar with the movement screen. Some of you who are watching this are, that's the assessment that we do when you first come in. We will see changes in the movement screen just by working on breathing. So we'll do those breathing exercises, see it change. We do it on a consistent basis and add in some motor control exercises, we get it to stick. Then the other other three, I should say, moving well through the ankle, moving well through the T-spine, and moving well through the hips. Those are areas that should have a bias towards mobility. Our ankle should move, right? It needs to have some control and stabilization, but we should have full range of motion in it. If I don't, it's like having, kind of no shock on one side. So if I'm going out for runs every day and I've only got a couple of degrees of range of motion in my right ankle, it's like not having a shock in that tire if it's my car. Hips, same thing. We need to have a bias of mobility, range of motion, and then add in the balance drills and mobility stuff or I should say stability stuff that we do, so that we have control through that range of motion. And then, as we mentioned earlier with the breathing stuff, the T-spine being able to move. When we sit in postures, sit at desks, we get locked down and we get into a position where we do not have quality movement through our upper back. If we don't do that at the top end, it will limit our ability to reach, or it'll limit our ability for one arm to do one thing and the other arm to do something else, which we need to do in sport, we need to do in life. From a hip standpoint, if I can't get down to the ground into half kneeling or get down on the ground, I can't play with kids, I can't pick things up off the ground. Life starts getting smaller. So that's why, like, what's the big deal about mobility? I just want to work out, just lift weights and look good. Like, I just need to get stronger, more powerful, more explosive. My sport, I'm standing. What's the big deal? Quality mobility in the long term is going to lead to a better life in the long term. If we stop moving our hand overhead, we're not able to reach stuff up high. If we stop getting down low to the ground, squatting, lunging, kneeling, we stop doing those things, you lose that ability, and life starts going from this to this. And we start looking, now we can only operate, manipulate things in our, kind of small window of space. And you can see how that can happen with older individuals. So, that's really what I wanted to talk about today, was just getting some ideas around why this is important. What other reasons why people lack mobility, and then just give you guys an idea of some of these mobility strategies. We've got, between the online training programs that we're running, group classes that we're running now, since we're all on lockdown, those are running live. We do a lot of elements of that mobility. And then we also have my YouTube channel has a ton of drills and stretches and things that people can do. If you're looking for resources, the other thing is obviously to just reach out to me if you need a program, especially at this stage of the game. We're just trying to help people in any way that we can to give people strategies while they're stuck home. So do you guys have any questions? We'll do kind of questions on this topic, this topic first, and then we'll move on to any kind of stuff with the gym. If there's any questions on that. All good?
I'm good.
Cool. Anything to add, Greg? Greg sees a lot of people who lack mobility, so.
So I think a lot of the things that you touched on are really important. I think a lot of people talk about, like, kind of the example you brought up, like, oh, my hamstrings are really tight. There's so many other issues that can create mobility deficits and limitations, where it's not always muscular and fascial. So things that you touched on that really work well for me are, like, look at the neural system. Is there, like, nerve tension involved somewhere? Because nerve needs to move freely, just like muscles and fascia. Some of the things we talked about too with, like, the inflammation. You can have, like, lymphatic systems that get blocked somewhere because of fascial restrictions, muscle restrictions. If that's not moving well, that creates a ton of issues. So if you don't see changes pretty quickly in terms of mobility in regards to fascia and muscle issues, then, start to think of some of those other things that could be restricting it. I think that's the biggest thing that I see, is usually if you can't get to it quickly, like, you're probably missing something.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Eileen and Matt, any questions? Are we good to go?
Good to go.
I mean, For me, I'm like, in this, can you hear me, Frank? Am I
Yeah,
am
I
I
can hear
alive
you. Yep.
here? All right, great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can hear you good.
I guess like I obviously having, 3 or 4 shoulder surgeries after playing now, and my concern, and even on a day-to-day basis, I have trouble with my neck
Hmm.
and just how my shoulders are moving. And you know, like if there was, 3 things I could do for both you guys on here,
Hmm.
3 things I could do, whether it be like, some T-spine exercise or with a roller, or the cross balls taped together,
Hmm.
where if you could go give me 1, 2, 3 off the top of your head, what would they be to just,
Yeah, yeah.
for long term for me to maintain proper posture and all those different things?
Yeah. Maybe I'll give you my kind of breakdown, and then Greg, I think you've had your hands on Matt already, so you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't. You have a better insight as to what could be done there. So, typically for us, if you come in and you had like a 1 on shoulder mobility, no pain, we would look to breathing first. So if
Okay.
you're not doing those breathing drills, I think I'm going to take the approach because I can't put my hands on you as a strength coach and trainer. It's not my lane, right? I would
Hmm.
defer to Greg to get more specific. Like he might be able to come up with more specific strategies. For me, I'm going to go like broad strokes and say, let's just clean up breathing. I mean, there's an assessment we can look at. We do 25 seconds, just seeing at the end of a normal breath, you hold your nose, and if you've got to beat 25 seconds. So you've got to be able to not feel like a twinge of I need a breath. That's one quick way. It's a screen. It's not a real like diagnostic test, but that might tell me if you are only able to hold for like 5 or 10 seconds, then I know your breathing is somewhat dysfunctional. It's based on that and a questionnaire. So like that's like a quick way you can test yourself. Just see if you can beat 25 seconds at the end of a normal breath. If you can't, then I would say like spend some time, just maybe a couple weeks on some of those breathing exercises, and then from there we look at the T spine. So we might do some soft tissue work, but we're kind of getting because we don't have the ability to get in there with our hands and be super specific. I probably would do just some general rolling. Anything in the upper body is kind of fair game. And then from there, we'll do a lot of those like open, like the rib pulls and get you in the bretzel position where you're working on your hips are kind of in one position, your shoulders are separated from them, and you're working on your breathing there. So it's, to use my mentor, Gray Cook's, like his terminology is kind of like get someone into position, and then you're almost like not to a place where you can't breathe anymore, because then you don't own that position. Also, you're getting not to a place where you feel stretch. It's right before that, and then you work on the breath to kind of like sand up against that spot, right? And then you might feel like, oh, I can access a little more, and then work on breathing more, and then work a little bit more, and see if you can keep going without feeling that like, oh, this is a stretch, or I'm forcing something, or oh my God, I can't breathe here, right? So that's kind of more of our general approach, where I think most people at the training level, they're like looking right at the glenohumeral, and they're looking at the shoulder. Meanwhile, it's deeper than that, right? It's going to be, we're kind of combining some of the neurological stuff, some of the chemical stuff with nutrition, and then also the mechanical stuff. So we're trying to condense all 3 strategies into what we're doing, because we have to be more general. And again, like if the general stuff improves it, hey, it got better. Like who cares? Like your neck doesn't
Hmm.
hurt anymore. You're moving better, and you're strong and stable. If you do those things that I just mentioned and it's not working, then I'd say, hey, you're not in pain anymore, but you should go see Greg. Now, if your neck is in pain, then I would just say go see Greg right off the
Okay.
bat, right? Because
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
the thing. Training, we shouldn't be working people with pain.
Sure.
At our level, I mean, there's a lot of trainers that do, but we shouldn't mess with it unless I have them come back. So if you go to Greg and he's going to work with you on some stuff, and then you come back to us and we can work on other areas and stay away from the pain. It's just with pain on board, it's really tough to get an accurate movement screen. It's tough to make any kind of changes. And then also just like, you don't know what it is. It could be something really serious, a real medical issue that we shouldn't be playing around with anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know about what would you add anything to that, Greg, as far as like more specific, because Matt, so
Yeah, and so I would start with what you said. So just the most bang for your buck. You're gonna get the most out of it by doing some breathing and some rib work. So like, and there's so many different variations that you could do. Like you could probably YouTube a ton of videos for just some different breathing exercise, but just by getting your ribs moving and the diaphragm moving, it's gonna free up the shoulder probably more than any specific shoulder stretch. So I generally would start there with ribs and then T-spine, kind of unlocking both of those. Again, those are probably the best place to start because you're gonna get the most bang for your buck. So I would say probably for me, my go-to T-spine drill would be along the lines of like the pretzel stretch. We rotate into your side, and then you add in your shoulders with it with a big arm circle. Just working that. It's probably like my go-to for most T-spine, abdominal issues, things like that. I would say probably next thing that I do with most people is, especially when you start talking about your neck tightness and shoulder tightness, I would say most times it's some sort of like nerve restriction too. So I start adding in some like just nerve glides where you're kind of like reaching up and across there, just kind of free up nerve also. I find that really loosens things up a lot more than just kind of like doing specific shoulder stretches. So I'd probably say like the T-spine arm circles, the nerve glides through there, and then you can get like a little more specific. So any type of like shoulder issues. So like shoulder rotations and supine. Other one that I really like for most people is just combining cervical spine and T-spine. So just sitting there, kind of just doing opposite motions. That also tends to free things up pretty well too. Great for like a warm up before you start to do any upper body lift or anything like that. And that's just not like, obviously not getting specific to your shoulder issues, because with you, you're going to have a ton of stuff with your AC joint, I'm sure sternum, things like that. That would be like a little more specific that we look at in more detail. But the other things I talked about, I would say at some point I'm giving those to most cervical spine or shoulder patients. You just you'll get a lot of bang for your buck with those.
Cool. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good stuff, guys. Any questions on status of classes or semi-privates? Eileen took the class this morning. Matt took the class this morning. So you guys are my star students at this point, but we're just going to keep doing this until we start adding more tiles of people around the outside. So just keep reaching out and see if we get more.
Greg, I have one question. I mean, well, just to piggyback on the last, what Matt was asking about, how do you strengthen that shoulder area? I know I've had a dislocated shoulder and I'm still weak. It's still weak.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to get it stronger.
Right,
My other side's fine, but the other side, I can only stay on it for so long if we're doing like planks or something, like side.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I would, my go-to, I would check, did we do the screen on you recently? I know we had in the past, but I don't know. It's probably been a while.
It's a while, I think. Yeah.
So like we would just do your screen to make sure that it's not still a mobility issue. Like if there's still a mobility restriction, then we would work on these things first and then add in the motor control and stabilization work that you're looking for. Now, with that being said, you also could have you could be predisposed to hypermobility, which might change the way that I approach that. Like you might have good or bad movement, but then hypermobility might add in a factor where we do just need to hammer motor control with you and just work on that. So do you still have pain with it or just weakness?
No, it's just weakness.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would test you, see if there's still a mobility issue there. If there isn't, if it was clear, like you scored well on the shoulder mobility test that we do, then I would look to, I mean, obviously we'd want to get a full screen too, because then we'd see other things that are going on. Like say your shoulders might be good, but your active straight leg raise is no good. That, believe it or not, could be impacting, like you do bear crawls and different things. So you can't even, it's hard to access like full motor control with your whole body without good balance and proprioception in every area. So we would look to make sure that you're clear on all your movement screen tests. And then it would be a lot of those, like, the go-to, I know it's like the bear crawl just is like kind of a catch-all for a lot of the like, upper body motor control issues. Being able to stabilize your shoulders on all fours. We'll typically do it like uphill and back down a hill, or we've probably done this with you guys in the class, take the bands and spin them over and cross them so that you're almost getting like walked like a dog.
Oh yeah.
But what the idea there is that we're pulling you into your hips. Sometimes a bear crawl can be like too heavy on the arms, right? So with the bands, we kind of pull your shoulders back into your hips, which gets your hip complex to kind of engage. It gets your core and your spine and your pelvis to engage together, and then that's going to integrate with the shoulder, right? So you know, it's not just about, especially if you're pain free and you have mobility, I would go with like, we need to get shoulder stability, but it's not like, you know, external and internal rotation exercises. Like, it's going to be more total body motor control type drills to help increase kind of more like system strength. So your like push-up correctives that we could do, like negative push-ups, pushing you back into a wall to get you to kind of use your hips, your core, and your shoulders together. You know, I think that's probably you're gonna get more contribution from the rest of your body, and not just like strengthen small little stabilizer muscles in the shoulder. I mean, that stuff is fine. You can do it. It's just the long term and where you're really going to feel a difference, where now you can pick up a heavier kettlebell and be in a plank position and feel solid, is when we have that engagement of the whole body, right?
Right. Okay.
Cool. Yep.
Thanks.
You got it. So we'll once we get out of quarantine, that's what we're going to work on with you.
Eileen, I could screen you before the class. Don't worry.
Oh, there's Justin.
Oh, hey,
Here.
Justin.
Hey,
Okay.
Justin.
How you doing?
How's it going?
Pretty good.
You in the break room right now?
I am in the sales development room right now.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks for joining in. I didn't realize you were on there.
Yes, I am on. I am on. So
Let me see. You know what? Because I have only I think I only had the small view of the videos. So there we go. All right, cool. All right, guys. Want to try to keep these. Obviously, if you have any questions, it's 12:33. I just want to try to keep these to 30 minutes. This way, people feel like, oh, if I get on, it's only going to be that half hour, and I can do that. Where I think if we stretch these long, then people are going to feel like it's another chore. And as crazy as it is, where we have time and we're all home, like, it seems busier than ever. It's insane. All right. So I think last week it was like every day felt like a week. But how you doing, Justin? You got anything to add, or you good?
no, I'm good. I listened to the whole thing.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah,
good.
I did. I know Eileen always had a struggle with the shoulder, and whether she was stabilizing on it, she would always it would just randomly happen. So I think definitely see if
All right, we got to mess with that. And like when we start adding, I know in the classes we've been kind of heavy endurance. I'm going to start getting Mike to do a little bit more of like a mobility and stability warm up in the beginning.
Sure.
Like we're kind of just jumping right into it. Because that's been the feedback, is people want to get volume in, but I think it would be good to do a little bit more.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For sure. At least 10 minutes of this kind of stuff first.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep.
All right.
Definitely. Yep.
All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of the day. We got 4:30 with Tina. If you're looking to do 2-a-days, Matt.
I go. Yeah, I'm gonna have like PTSD. You start saying that. You know what I mean? I can't.
Oh man! So, all right, good stuff, guys. Thank you for being on the call, and I'll talk to you guys either later or tomorrow.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Frank.
Okay.
All
right, guys. Bye.
Oh.